Hello everyone. If you enjoy my channel, please support me with one like, one subscribe, and one share.
The bill that changed everything. Have you ever looked at a medical bill and felt your heart drop before you even opened it? I have. One ordinary day in the United States, I thought I was simply tired. A few hours later, I was sitting in a medical office, holding my phone, staring at a number that made my hands shake. What scared me most was not only my health. It was the thought of what this could do to my family, my marriage, and the future we had worked so hard to protect. And then I remembered one thing: I had health insurance. I used to think health insurance was just another monthly bill, something boring that disappeared from my bank account. That day, I learned it could be the difference between facing a difficult moment and feeling completely alone. I want to tell you this story slowly, in simple English, because if you are learning English through stories, real life gives us some of the most useful words. My story began on an ordinary morning at home in the U.S. I was making coffee while my children were getting ready, and my husband was already thinking about work. I smiled, but inside, I felt strangely weak. I told myself, maybe I just need more sleep. You know that sentence, right? We often use it when we do not want to admit that something may be wrong. My brain was basically acting like an overconfident roommate. Relax. Nothing is happening. But my body was not joking. By the afternoon, I knew I needed medical attention. At the clinic, the nurse asked me a simple question: "Do you have health insurance?" I said, "Yes." That tiny word suddenly felt much bigger than it had the day before. The staff began explaining my coverage, my copay, and what I might need to pay. I realized that these were not just difficult insurance words. They were words connected to my real life. Coverage means what your insurance plan helps pay for. Copay is the amount you may pay for a covered service. I repeated the words quietly to myself, almost like an English lesson. But this was not a classroom. This was my life. And while I was trying to understand every sentence, another question appeared on the screen in front of me, one question that made my stomach tighten. It was about the next step in my treatment, and the answer could change everything. I looked at my husband, and for the first time, I saw fear in his eyes too. We had always talked about money, school, groceries, and our children. We had never imagined that one medical moment could test all of us. When my body said stop. The strange thing about fear is that it can make a simple room feel enormous. I remember sitting there, looking at the white walls, the medical equipment, and the small clock above the door. Everything was quiet, but inside my head, it was extremely loud. I kept asking myself, what if this is serious? I had spent years taking care of my family, making meals, remembering school schedules, paying bills, and solving little problems before anyone else noticed them. I was used to being the person who said, "I'm fine." But that afternoon, I finally understood that saying "I'm fine" does not always mean you are fine. The doctor came in and asked me how I had been feeling. I tried to explain everything in simple English. I feel weak. I feel tired. Something feels different. Those sentences were not impressive English, but they were enough. That was an important lesson for me. When your health matters, Perfect English is not the goal. Being understood is the goal. I had always worried about making grammar mistakes when speaking English. I thought people might judge me if I used the wrong tense or forgot a word. But sitting in that room, I suddenly stopped caring about sounding perfect. I cared about communicating clearly. The doctor listened carefully and ordered some tests. While I waited, I looked at my phone and searched through my insurance information. I saw words like deductible, covered services, and out-of-pocket cost. Honestly, the words looked like they had been designed to frighten normal people. I almost laughed. Why did insurance vocabulary have to sound like a secret language? But I decided to learn one word at a time. Deductible. I repeated it slowly. Coverage. Again. Copay. Again. Suddenly, my health problem had become an unexpected English lesson. But then my phone rang. It was my husband. I answered and tried to sound calm. "I'm okay," I said. There was a short silence. Then he asked, "Are you sure?" I looked at the floor. I wanted to say yes, because that was what I always said. Instead, I whispered, "I'm scared." Saying those two words felt harder than any English sentence I had ever spoken. When he arrived, he did not give me a speech. He simply sat beside me and held my hand. That small gesture told me something I had forgotten. I did not have to carry every problem alone. Later, the medical staff explained that more care might be necessary. My mind immediately jumped to money. How much would this cost? Would our insurance cover it? Would we have to choose between medical care and something our children needed? I looked at my husband again, and he squeezed my hand. "We'll figure it out," he said. I wanted to believe him. Then the nurse returned with another piece of information, and this time, the number she mentioned was not what I expected. Love during a scary moment. The number the nurse mentioned was lower than I expected, but I still could not relax. I had learned something important that day. Sometimes the scariest part of a medical problem is not the pain. It is the uncertainty. You do not know what will happen tomorrow, how long recovery will take, or how much your family will have to change. I sat quietly while my husband stayed beside me. He looked tired too, but he kept trying to make me smile. "At least you finally have an excuse to rest," he joked. I looked at him and laughed. Rest? Who will cook? He raised his eyebrows and said, "Apparently, today is the day I learn." For the first time that afternoon, I laughed for real. It was a small laugh, but it felt like opening a window in a dark room. At home, our children noticed immediately that something was different. Usually, I was moving from one room to another like a person with an invisible checklist inside her head. That evening, I moved slowly. My daughter asked, "Mom, are you okay?" I smiled and said, "I'm okay, sweetheart. I just need some rest." She looked at me carefully and replied, "You always say that." I had no answer. Children sometimes notice the truth faster than adults. I sat down at the kitchen table, and my husband brought me a glass of water. We talked about the medical appointment, the tests, and our health insurance. I explained what I understood about coverage and copays. I did not know every detail, but I knew enough to ask questions. That was another lesson I want to share with anyone learning English. You do not need hundreds of difficult words to protect yourself. Sometimes a few clear questions are powerful. Is this covered? How much will I pay? What happens next? Simple English can be very useful English. I repeated those sentences quietly, and my husband repeated them with me. We started laughing because he made deductible sound like the name of an expensive French dessert. For a few minutes, our kitchen became an English classroom disguised as a family conversation. But underneath the laughter, I was still afraid. That night, after the children went to bed, I sat on the couch with my husband. The house was finally quiet. I told him something I had never said before. I'm afraid this will change our life. He looked at me for a long moment. Then he said, maybe it will. But we will change with it. I started crying. Not because I felt hopeless, but because I realized how much I had been trying to control everything. Health had reminded me that life does not always ask permission before changing the plan. My insurance could help with the financial side, but it could not remove the fear, hold my hand, or sit beside me at night. My family could. And just when I thought the hardest part was over, my phone showed a new message from the insurance company. I opened it, and suddenly, my heart started beating faster again. Learning health English the hard way. The message on my phone was full of words I had seen before but never truly understood. I stared at the screen and thought, why does English suddenly become 10 times harder when money and health are involved? In everyday life, I could talk about dinner, school, work, weather, and family without thinking too much. But now I was reading words like claim, provider, network, deductible, and coverage. It felt like someone had taken ordinary English, put it in a suit, and sent it to a meeting without me. I almost laughed, but I knew I needed to understand it. So I sat at the kitchen table and opened my insurance information. My husband came over with 2 cups of tea. English class, he asked. I smiled. The most expensive English class I have ever taken. We laughed, and that little joke made the situation feel less frightening. I started with one word, coverage. I said it slowly. Coverage. Then I made a simple sentence. My insurance coverage helps pay for covered medical care. I repeated it several times. Next came claim. A claim is a request sent to an insurance company asking it to process or pay for a medical service according to the plan. I did not need a complicated definition. I needed to understand what it meant for me. Then I looked at provider. That word simply helped me understand the medical professional or facility involved in my care. Little by little, the strange insurance language became familiar. I realized something interesting about learning English. Your brain remembers words better when they are connected to something meaningful. I was not memorizing vocabulary from a textbook. I was learning words because I needed them. The words had emotion attached to them. They belonged to my story. I practiced speaking out loud. Is this covered? Is my doctor in network? How much is my copay? Can you explain this charge? These sentences were short, but they gave me confidence. Before this experience, I sometimes stayed quiet because I was afraid of making mistakes. Now I understood that silence could be more dangerous than imperfect English. If I did not understand something about my healthcare, I needed to ask. One question could save confusion, stress, and sometimes money. My husband listened while I practiced. Then he said, "You sound like a professional." I laughed. No, I sound like someone who finally learned to ask questions. That night, I felt stronger than I had felt in days. My health situation had not magically disappeared, but something inside me had changed. I was no longer staring at the insurance document like it was an enemy. I was learning how to read it, how to question it, and how to advocate for myself. But the next morning, another phone call came in. This time, it was not from the clinic. It was from the insurance company, and the person on the other end had something important to tell me. Why coverage really matters. The phone call began with a sentence I will never forget. "We need to discuss your medical claim." My stomach tightened immediately. Those words sounded serious, and my imagination started running faster than my phone battery. I thought, what happened? Was something denied? Did I misunderstand my coverage? I took a deep breath and reminded myself of something I had learned during those difficult days. Do not panic before you understand the facts. I asked the representative to explain everything slowly. "Could you please repeat that?" I said. "Could you explain what I need to pay?" She patiently went through the details. Some services were covered under my plan, while other costs could depend on my deductible, copay, or coinsurance. Suddenly, the vocabulary I had practiced at my kitchen table was no longer vocabulary. It was real life. I wrote down each important word. Covered. Deductible. Copay. Claim. I repeated them quietly, almost like I was preparing for an English speaking test. Except this test had my health on one side and my family's finances on the other. The representative explained that my insurance would help with eligible medical expenses according to the terms of my plan. I knew that did not mean everything was free. That was an important lesson for me. Health insurance is not a magic card that makes every medical bill disappear. It is a system designed to help manage covered healthcare costs, and understanding your plan matters. I had never paid much attention to the details before. I simply knew that every month, money came out of our budget for insurance. I used to think, I hope we never need it. Now I understood the strange truth. You buy protection hoping you will not need it, but when life surprises you, that protection can matter enormously. I remembered how my family had discussed monthly expenses. Groceries, electricity, school activities, car expenses. Everything had a place in our budget. A major medical event was different. You cannot always plan for your body to become sick. You cannot schedule an emergency around payday. That was when I understood why health coverage mattered to me beyond the paperwork. It gave our family some financial protection while we were already dealing with emotional stress. Later that evening, I told my husband what I had learned. He looked at me and said, "So the boring bill finally became useful." I laughed. Exactly. We had spent so much time thinking about insurance as an expense that we forgot what it was supposed to do. Provide protection when life became unpredictable. That night, I felt a strange mixture of relief and gratitude. But then my husband opened our monthly budget and pointed to one number. His expression changed. "We need to talk about this," he said. I looked at the number and realized the medical situation was about to test us in a completely different way. The stress behind the hospital door. Money has a strange talent for turning a quiet kitchen into a courtroom. That night, my husband and I sat across from each other with our budget between us, and suddenly every number looked louder than usual. We knew our health insurance was helping, but there were still expenses we had to consider. I felt guilty. I thought about our children, their needs, their future, and all the little things we normally enjoyed without thinking twice. I looked at my husband and said, "Maybe we should cut everything unnecessary." He smiled gently and said, "You are not unnecessary." That sentence stopped me. I had been thinking about money so much that I had started treating myself like another expense. The next morning, I went back to the medical office for another appointment. While I waited, I noticed how many different people were sitting around me. A young woman was talking quietly on the phone. An older man was reading a newspaper. A father was holding his child's hand. Everyone seemed to have a different story, but we were all sitting in the same kind of uncertainty. That room taught me something I had never understood before. Health problems do not care how organized your calendar is. They do not care if you have a busy workday or a family dinner planned. They simply arrive. And when they arrive, preparation matters. I started writing down questions before every appointment. It became one of my most useful habits. I wrote, "What is this test for? What should I expect? Is this covered? What will I pay?" My English was simple, but my questions were clear. I realized that confidence does not always come from knowing everything. Sometimes confidence comes from being willing to say, "I do not understand. Please explain it again." That sentence became one of my favorite English sentences. It was useful, honest, and surprisingly powerful. At home, my children noticed that I was still worried. My son came into the kitchen and asked, "Mom, are you scared?" I paused. I could have said no. Instead, I said, "A little." He nodded and said, "Me too." Then he hugged me. I laughed through my tears because children have a way of making complicated emotional situations very simple. We hugged in the kitchen, and for a moment, the medical bills, insurance forms, and frightening possibilities disappeared. I understood that my family did not need me to pretend I was invincible. They needed me to be honest. That evening, my husband and I talked about our finances again. We were still worried, but we were no longer fighting the problem separately. We were facing it together. And then something unexpected happened. A new statement arrived, and this time, the amount was dramatically different from the number I had feared. I stared at the page, looked at my husband, and whispered, "Is this really what we owe?" Our marriage was tested. I looked at the statement 3 times because I was sure I had read it wrong. The amount we owed was much lower than the frightening number I had imagined in my head. I turned the paper toward my husband and asked, "Am I seeing this correctly?" He checked it carefully, then looked at me with a smile. "Yes," he said. "This is real." I felt my shoulders drop for the first time in days. Our health insurance had not made the medical situation disappear, but it had helped protect us from a much heavier financial burden. I suddenly understood something that sounded simple but felt powerful. Coverage matters most when life does not go according to plan. Still, the experience had already changed our marriage. Before this happened, my husband and I were good at solving practical problems. We paid bills, took care of the kids, worked, cooked, cleaned, and kept moving. We were a team, but sometimes we acted like 2 managers running the same company. We talked about schedules more than feelings. That changed when I became sick. One evening, I was sitting on the couch when my husband asked, "What are you really afraid of?" I wanted to give him the easy answer. I wanted to say, "The bills." But that was not the truth. I finally said, "I'm afraid of becoming a burden." He looked surprised. Then he moved closer and said, "You are my wife, not a bill." I started crying. It was such a simple sentence, but it reached a place inside me that numbers could not reach. I had spent so much time worrying about what my health might cost that I forgot I was more than a financial problem. I was a mother, a wife, a person who had spent years caring for other people. And now I had to learn how to receive care too. That was difficult for me. I was used to saying, "I can do it." My husband reminded me, "You do not have to do everything." So we made small changes. He cooked more often. The children helped around the house. I rested without feeling guilty. And strangely, our family became closer. I also continued practicing English. Every evening, I chose a few useful sentences from my medical experience and said them aloud. "I need more information. Can you explain this? I have a question about my coverage. I need time to think." These were not complicated sentences, but they gave me something I had been missing: confidence. I learned that English is not only about grammar. Sometimes English gives you the courage to speak when something important is happening. My health experience had taught me to speak up, and my marriage had taught me that asking for help was not weakness. But just when our home began to feel peaceful again, my son asked me a question at the dinner table that completely surprised me. He looked at me and said, "Mom, can I ask you something about being sick?" My children saw my fear. My son's question made the whole table quiet. I looked at him and said, "Of course." He played with his fork for a moment before asking, "Were you really scared?" I could have given him a simple answer, something comfortable like, "No, everything was fine." But I decided to tell him the truth. "Yes," I said. I was scared. He looked at me carefully, as if he had never imagined that his mother could feel fear. Then he asked, Why didn't you tell us? I took a slow breath. Because I thought being a good mom meant always being strong. My daughter immediately looked at me and said, "But you can be scared and still be strong." I almost laughed because she had just given me a lesson I had needed for years. That evening, we talked about health in simple English. I explained words like doctor, appointment, medicine, insurance, and coverage. I did not want my children to become experts in insurance. I simply wanted them to understand that health was something our family could talk about openly. We practiced a few sentences together. I don't feel well. I need to see a doctor. Can you help me? I have health insurance. My son made a dramatic face and said, "Mom, this sounds like homework." I laughed. Yes, but this homework could actually help you one day. The funny part was that teaching them also helped me. I realized that when we explain something in simple English, we understand it more clearly ourselves. I stopped trying to sound sophisticated. I focused on being understood. That became one of the biggest lessons from my experience. You do not need perfect English to talk about important things. You need clear words, calm questions, and the courage to speak. Later that night, after the children went to bed, I stood in the hallway and listened to the quiet house. I felt grateful. Not because everything had been easy. It had not. I was grateful because the difficult experience had shown me something beautiful about my family. My children had seen my fear, but they had also seen me recover. My husband had seen my weakness, but he had stayed beside me. And I had discovered that accepting help did not make me less independent. It made me human. I also realized that health insurance was only one part of the lesson. Preparation mattered. Asking questions mattered. Understanding your coverage mattered. But none of those things could replace family, love, or emotional support. The next morning, I woke up feeling different. I was still recovering, but I no longer felt like I was waiting for something terrible to happen. I wanted to live differently. I wanted to take better care of myself, spend more meaningful time with my family, and continue improving my English. Then, while making breakfast, I noticed something on the calendar that made me stop. It was a date I had almost forgotten, and it marked the beginning of a completely new chapter for me. I stopped taking tomorrow for granted. Some dates look ordinary until they suddenly become important. The date on my calendar was the day of my follow-up appointment, but this time, I did not wake up terrified. I woke up curious. For weeks, I had asked, what if something goes wrong? Now I was asking, what can I do better from here? Fear had taken too much space in my life. It made me postpone small joys, ignore my own needs, and sometimes avoid practicing English because I felt tired. I kept saying, I'll do it tomorrow. But tomorrow is a confident little word. It promises everything and guarantees nothing. At my appointment, the doctor listened carefully and reminded me that taking care of myself mattered. I asked questions, wrote down the answers, and repeated anything I did not understand. This time, I was not embarrassed to say, could you explain that in simple English? The sentence felt natural. I had learned that understanding your health is more important than pretending you understand. After the appointment, I sat in my car for a few minutes. I thought about the person I had been before this experience. I rarely stopped to ask myself, how are you really doing? So I decided to make small changes. Nothing dramatic. I took short walks when I could. I made more time for quiet conversations with my husband. I listened to my children instead of checking my phone while they talked. And every evening, I practiced English for a few minutes. I chose simple sentences connected to real life. I need to make an appointment. I want to understand my coverage. I have a question. I am feeling better today. My son started teasing me. Mom, are you talking to yourself again? I laughed. Yes. I am my easiest English partner. English practice was no longer another boring task. It became proof that I could keep growing after a frightening experience. Sometimes progress is asking one question, understanding one sentence, making one healthy choice, or speaking even when your English is not perfect. Months later, I looked at my old medical papers. The pages that once represented fear now represented a lesson. My health insurance had helped protect our finances, but the experience had changed something deeper inside me. It taught me to prepare, ask questions, accept help, and stop treating tomorrow like it was guaranteed. I thought the story was finally over. Then my husband walked into the room holding an envelope. He looked at me and said, "You should read this." I opened it slowly. The first line made my heart stop for a completely different reason. Health, love, and a new beginning. The first line on the letter was not another bill. It was an update about my medical claim, and this time, I smiled before I even finished reading it. The final amount we were responsible for was manageable, and more importantly, my health was moving in the right direction. I put the letter down and looked at my husband. We did not celebrate with anything expensive. We simply hugged in the kitchen while our children laughed nearby. It was an ordinary moment, but to me, it felt extraordinary. I had entered this experience thinking health insurance was just another monthly expense. I left it understanding something much bigger. In the United States, health coverage can help protect you from unexpected medical costs, but knowing what your plan covers, asking questions, and understanding your responsibilities are also important. Insurance cannot promise that life will be easy. It cannot prevent every illness, remove every fear, or guarantee that every service will be covered. But when something unexpected happens, having coverage and understanding your plan can give you one less problem to carry. For me, the biggest lesson was not about money. It was about people. My husband taught me that love is not only romantic dinners or beautiful words. Sometimes love is sitting beside someone in a medical office. Sometimes it is cooking dinner when your partner is tired. Sometimes it is saying, "You are not a burden." My children taught me that being strong does not mean hiding fear. It means being honest and continuing forward. And English taught me something surprisingly important. You do not need perfect English to protect yourself, communicate your needs, or ask for help. You can start with simple sentences. I have a question. Please explain this. Is this covered? What will I pay? What happens next? These small sentences can open big doors. Today, when I practice English, I remember that difficult period of my life. I no longer see English as a test that I might fail. I see it as a tool that helps me connect, understand, and speak for myself. I also look at my health differently. I do not wait until something feels wrong before paying attention. I try to appreciate ordinary mornings, family dinners, small conversations, and quiet evenings. We often think happiness will arrive as a huge event. But sometimes happiness is simply sitting at the table with the people you love and realizing everyone is okay. My health insurance helped protect my family during a frightening chapter, but love helped me get through it. And perhaps that is the real lesson. Preparation protects the future, but gratitude helps you enjoy the present. If you are learning English today and you feel frustrated, remember this: you do not have to understand everything at once. One sentence. One word. One question. One day at a time. Your English can improve, your confidence can grow, and your story can change in ways you cannot imagine yet. I once thought my scary medical experience was the end of a peaceful chapter. Now I see it differently. It was the moment I learned to value my health, my family, my voice, and even the simple English sentences I once felt afraid to say. Sometimes life scares us just enough to wake us up. And when we wake up, we realize that the things we were searching for were already beside us.